Uh, Good evening. Welcome you all to the 40th lecture in the Democracy Dialogue series organized by New Socialist Initiative. This is Subhash Gatade. We feel honored that this evening we have with us Professor Pervez Hoodbhoy, eminent physicist, author, and public intellectual. Some of you may recall that around 2.5 years back, also he spared his valuable time to share his views in the series when he spoke on partition of India, three outstanding questions. Professor Hoodbhoy is a nuclear physicist as well as a prominent activist, in particular concerned with promotion of freedom of speech, secularism, scientific temper, and education in Pakistan. He is the founder director of the Black Hole in Islamabad. As the head of Mashal Books in Lahore, he leads a major translation efforts to produce books in Urdu that promote modern thought, human rights, and emancipation of women. Professor Hoodbhoy received his undergraduate and graduate degrees from MIT and has taught physics and mathematics at Forman Christian College in Lahore and previously taught at Lahore University of Management Sciences and Qaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. He has been a visiting professor at MIT, Carnegie Mellon University, and University of Maryland. He has been a recipient of many awards, prominent being Baker Award for Electronics, Abdus Salam Prize for Mathematics, and UNESCO's Kalinga Prize for popularization of science. He has written and edited many books. Here is a list of few of his publications. Pakistan, Origins, Identity and Future, Routledge, 2023. Confronting the Bomb, Pakistani and Indian Scientists Speak Out, Oxford University Press, 2013. Education and the State, 50 Years of Pakistan, Oxford University Press, 1998. Islam and Science, Religious Orthodoxy and the Battle for Rationality, Z Books, 1991. This evening, he will be speaking on South Asian futures in a tripolar world. Friends, please welcome Professor Pervez Hoodbhoy.
Please. Thank you, Subhash. Thank you, Ravi, for inviting me here. I'm very honored. I will be speaking out of my depth because I plan to take on three very big questions. They're so big that I don't know. Personally, I'm not capable of answering them, but I don't know who is because of their very nature. So my first question, which is rhetorically and directed to myself as much as to you, is who will rule the world in the next decade? Then, with this in the background, I will ask the question, where do the different countries of South Asia stand geopolitically, and what are their present trajectories? It may be those trajectories change, but at least we ought to know where they currently stand. And then is the still bigger question, what should these countries be doing in this geopolitical framework? And is there a chance that they can achieve what they ought to be doing? So let's take on the first big question, because after World War II, there was a kind of international order that was agreed between the two major powers of that time. And those were the United States and the Soviet Union. Britain by then was fading. Yeah, sure, it was there. There was the Yalta Conference in 1945, which was followed by the Potsdam Conference. And you had Joseph Stalin and Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. But Churchill had been cut down to size because of what had happened to Britain during the Second World War. And so it was basically these two big powers that were carving up the world, but they knew that neither was big enough to run the world by itself. Now, this conference, the Yalta one, it comes about 30 years after World War I, which saw the biggest catastrophes that the world had seen up to that point. And that was something like 10 million people dead on both sides. World War II had been even bigger. And now that atomic weapons had come into existence, well, it was clear that you had a need for nations to abide by rules, institutions, and some kind of international norms that had to be established. So this is why 5 countries, all 5 big countries, which means the United States, the Soviet Union, the Britain, China, and France, they agreed to create the United Nations. And so the UN was formed in 1945. So then we had the Cold War, and it lasted a good long time until the collapse of the Soviet Union. But still, we continued to have a rule-based world. Maybe the rules weren't very good. Maybe it was all skewed in favor of the big guys. And of course, the 5 still have their veto powers in the Security Council of the United Nations. But at least it was rule-based. Now, that era seems to be ending. Trump and Putin, they want to negate all or many of the agreements that their countries had signed. And these were, of course, solemnly inked by their representatives. Sorry, I lost the thread. So it was Putin and Trump are tearing up all these agreements. Putin, of course, through his invasion of Ukraine, and he simply said that he doesn't recognize Ukraine as a member state of the United Nations, that agreements made at the time of Boris Yeltsin he's not going to respect. But even more massively, the United States has torn up one agreement after the other. There was under Trump, his first stint in power was the INF Treaty, which limited nuclear weapons, intermediate nuclear weapons, intermediate range nuclear weapons. And he said he simply walked out of it. He's walked out of UNESCO, doesn't accept the authority of the International Criminal Court. Tragically for the world, he's walked out of the Paris Climate Agreement. And had he not walked out of the JCPOA, that is to say the agreement on the Iran nuclear issue, maybe he wouldn't have had that recent war. But he did that and many others. So in refusing to recognize all these international agreements, the United States has become what it has frequently called other countries. It is now a rogue state. It is one that spurns any law but its own. Well, can it rule the world? Well, of course, it's a very big power. Its economy is the largest in the world. And in 2025, which is this year, its GNP was of the order of $30 trillion. Now, compare that with China, $19 trillion, and Russia, which is $2 trillion. So on the one hand, it doesn't seem to make sense to say that, they're all 3 big guys, because where's 30 and where's 2? But in terms of military preparedness, the ability to inflict pain on an adversary, I think that Russia is not too far in its ability to inflict major damage, actually catastrophic damage upon the United States with its development of hypersonic missiles and so forth. So here we have these three major players, and let's note that each is aggressive and each is pursuing a very nationalist agenda for territorial expansion. Yes, territorial expansion. Under Trump and the MAGA slogan, MAGA, everyone knows, is Make America Great Again. Well, under that, the US is very frank about it. It says that it wants to acquire Greenland, which means either buy it or it'll take it over. And it would like Canada to become the 51st state, I mean, part of the United States, which the Canadians certainly don't want. It, through force of, well, it's not just force of arms, but in terms of economic penalties. And hence we saw this game, which continues, of extremely high tariffs. And basically, the United States now wants the rest of the world to pay tribute to it. So, like Genghis Khan or whoever, the big emperor wants everybody to come and kiss his feet. And that's happened with one country after the other that has traveled to the US and tried to make deals with the US. In some cases, they have succeeded. In others, they have not. But there's still a lot more of that coming. It believes that it can hold its preeminent position because it can now work towards creating a golden dome. So just like Israel has the Iron Dome, the United States wants to create the perfect missiles shield, which would protect it from missiles from anywhere. They could be from China, they could be from Russia, or from North Korea. And they will give it perfect protection. And so because it has the technological acumen, it believes it can go that way. No longer is it promoting laissez-faire capitalism. No longer is it pretending that it is a force for the universal good. Of course, capitalism is still defined by the rules, by the dynamic forces of trade and production, but now it has assumed, I'd say, a predatory and a tributary character. So much for the United States. What about Russia? So the Ukraine war is basically about reclaiming Russia's claim to much of Europe, the parts of Europe that border Russia, and the justification is that this is what Russia used to be under the Tsars. So that was Imperial Russia from 1700 and something until the October Revolution of 1917, which brought about Lenin and then later Stalin. So Putin places himself in the line of the great Tsars and maybe thinks of himself as Vladimir the Great of the 10th century Russia. Well, he has a relatively small economy. As I said, it's only $2 trillion. But the massiveness of the Soviet military effort is it sort of compensates for that. Remember the fact that, once upon a time, the best aircraft used to be the MiGs. And this was just shortly after World War II, when fighter aircraft were had just gone towards, away from the propeller driven to the jet aircraft. Well, this is Russia's aim. The Europeans are afraid of Russia, and they have already seen that Russia is striking out beyond Ukraine. There has been economic sabotage. There's been the blowing up of undersea pipelines, the cutting of internet cables, and that Russia has developed a substantial capacity in that regard. And so the neighbors, the neighboring countries like Estonia and Moldavia and even Poland are afraid of what might happen if Russia should continue unchecked. Let's now come to China. Well, it is expansionist. It seeks to increase its influence over other countries, but its expansionism is far more limited than that of the United States or even Russia's. Even though its military capabilities are limited, I mean, they're very small compared to that of the United States. They have just one aircraft carrier or two, maybe. America has 11. And America is all over the globe, but China's front is just the China Sea. Its prime goal is now to make Taiwan part of China, and but it's an imperial country now in the sense that it wants markets, and now it's not interested, as it once used to be, in exporting its ideology, and that makes it very welcome to countries like Pakistan, to which I shall turn soon. The days when it used to export socialism are long gone. They went with Mao. All they want is now bigger markets, more influence, and and of course, China is growing bigger and bigger economically. So coming back to the figures I gave earlier, $30 trillion was for the United States and 17 for China. But in terms of purchasing power parity, that's a term that economists use, China is already ahead of the United States. And so if you look at, so in terms of how much they actually produce, you adjust for this fact, China has already exceeded the United States. Okay, so here is this big overarching configuration. And now the question is, where does the rest of the world stand? I'll talk about that briefly before we come to where South Asian countries stand. Look at Europe. Europe, with the European Union, should have been the strongest economically, but it is not. In fact, Europe has, and as far as it goes militarily, well, the EU was never a military alliance. It is now not a big contender in terms of world politics. I mean, in terms of it being a military power. Europe, I would say, has been cowed down by the United States. And so if you look at the recent NATO meeting held in Brussels, I think it was a few weeks ago, it was decided there that Europe will now be spending 5% on defense instead of 2%. But that money will not go into building up its economy. So not to build planes or submarines domestically, but rather buy them from the United States. And so this is simply a way that the United States has discovered to funnel resources in Europe towards itself. The fact that it was agreed to shows, well, perhaps lack of spine of the EU. Perhaps it shows that the EU is now so afraid of Russia and so convinced that it cannot let go of NATO as an effective fighting force that they agreed to this. Now, whether this will be implemented or not, I don't know, because each country has its own domestic public to contend with. But certainly, this is what was agreed upon. In each of these European countries, whether it be Germany or France, these are the big contenders, the hard right is making a strong comeback. And you see that with, of course, you see that in Germany, but you see that in France. And my friends in France tell me that there's a very good possibility that Le Pen might be able to win the next election. So we are very likely to see in many European countries the re-emergence of the highly of the hard right, which is, of course, primarily focused on immigration, but also believes very much in white power, which, of course, now under Trump, that's the direction that the US has taken. So now let's move to the Middle East, where the war is ongoing, where every day you see the horror in Gaza. You see the helplessness of Europe and the rest of the world in this matter. But you see, above and beyond all else, the demoralization of the Gulf Arabs, who, as this massacre goes on, as this genocide and ethnic cleansing goes on in Palestine, nevertheless humbly prostrate themselves at the feet of America and even Israel. They offered a tithe, which you pay to the big landlords. They offered a tithe of $3.6 trillion investment in America. And Qatar offered a personal jetliner to Donald Trump. And so even while Israel continued dropping bombs on Gaza, now it just shoots Palestinian kids for fun. Well, you didn't have an interruption of Emirates and Turkish Airlines and Qatar Airlines flights to Tel Aviv. In fact, just today in today's newspaper, I saw that there are special discounts for Tel Aviv. So they have been completely and totally cowed down. There were the Abraham Accords. So Israel is recognized. Israeli tourists now come to Dubai. They travel all over the Middle East now among these countries. Iran. So now let me move closer towards our part of the world, starting with Iran. Well, Iran was once the outlier. It was the last to challenge the US-Israeli domination of the entire Middle East. This domination was in large part motivated by the fact that the resources of the Middle East had to be kept within the ambit of the Western powers. But now it is the ambit of the US primarily. And so the Arabs, the monarchies had pretty much given in. Syria, which was racked by civil war, Libya too, these were systematically dismantled. I'm not saying that I am in the least bit unhappy to see Bashar al-Assad go, or earlier on, Gaddafi go. But what resulted in their place was absolute anarchy. And so their removal was not with the consideration of a better future for those countries, but rather with a view of consolidating the US and Israeli control over that part of the world. Now, Iran had been an outlier. It still is pretending to be one, but after 12 days of war, not years, but days of war, its defiance is now pretty much token. Months earlier, we saw how its allies in Lebanon and in Yemen had been decimated. Now, the entire leadership of Hezbollah, as you know, was destroyed by this stratagem of the pagers. They put explosives in the pagers, and so they knocked out all the top leadership over there, and they haven't recovered from that. So those thousands of or tens of thousands of missiles that had been placed around Israel never even got off. They were liquidated. For Iran, the air defense systems that it had purchased from China were knocked out in the first few hours of the conflict. So these were critical to seeing if the enemy planes were approaching, but they could easily be either destroyed with missiles, or they could also be jammed, whatever it is. And so we heard very soon after the conflict began that the skies over Tehran are ours. That is, Israel, the US and Israel's. So Iran, in my estimation, will continue to spout rhetoric, but in fact, it has been defanged. It knows that in any conflict, it will be pretty much liquidated if something happens. And as we know, Ayatollah Khamenei's was in their crosshairs, and he could have been taken out. But Trump says, I didn't allow them to take out Khamenei. Kind of him. But Iran has an inner weakness too. It's not just the fact that it doesn't have air defense systems. The fact is that it is a theocracy. And it's a Shia-style Islamic state which has sustained its from 1979, that is to say the Khomeini revolution, to the present. But in the process, it has deeply alienated its younger generations, and the mullahs are hated by a good fraction of the Iranian population, a part of which has fled overseas, a part of which continues to live within Iran, and which supplied it that inner information that led to the destruction of the Iranian top leadership in a matter of hours. In fact, the attack began with the elimination of the top military leadership, and that couldn't have happened unless there were informers from within, and there are plenty of those because there is a lot of hatred for the mullahs. So Iran has been weakened. Where it'll go? Well, the Americans, the Israelis want regime change over there. The young people want regime change, but most of them don't want it to be directed by Israel and the United States. They would like Iran to be a normal country. Now, this is very hard for me to comment upon, but it is possible that it is unlikely that they will succeed in the short term. Hopefully, in the longer term, more liberal, secular, progressive voices will prevail. But now let me move to Afghanistan. So I'll move gradually closer towards Pakistan and then India, Bangladesh, Nepal. Afghanistan is very much a medieval theocracy. Yeah, they kicked out the Americans, and in spite of trillions of dollars spent over there on blood and treasure, yet it couldn't work out because the Taliban proved to be too resilient. They were installed with Pakistan's help, although Pakistan denied it. They today are in a peculiar position. Nobody likes them. All countries are resentful of the fact that the women of Afghanistan are not allowed to appear in public, that they're confined, in fact, to their homes, that girls cannot be educated, and it's even beyond medieval as far as a theocracy is concerned, because it has combined the worst of Islam and the worst of tribalism to create a highly unlivable situation for its people, as a consequence of which millions fled after the Taliban takeover in 2022, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Some of those millions came here to Pakistan. Others fled to Iran. And the millions who came to Pakistan, they fled because their children, their girl children couldn't go to school, that they were ethnically perhaps a bit different, that such as the Hazaras, because their facial features make it very obvious who they are. And some had worked with the Americans against the Taliban, and so they had to flee. Well, all of them were most of them, many of them have been pushed back into Afghanistan. And what has happened to them is a very sad story. The same goes for Iran, which, following Pakistan, pushed out millions of Afghans from its borders. It's a very peculiar twist of history that Afghanistan should have been a very close ally of Pakistan, because after all, we Pakistanis put them there. I mean, there's nothing hidden about that. They were there in Quetta, they were there in Peshawar. The ISI was helping them. When the Taliban took over Kabul and chased the Americans out, our prime minister at that time, Imran Khan, said, finally, the Afghans have broken the chains of slavery. And the ISI chief of that time went to Kabul and was seen at the Serena Hotel boasting and with a cup of tea in his hand. General Faiz Hamid, who's had a bad stroke of luck because he's in jail right now, but for different reasons. So we in Pakistan, by we, I don't mean me, but the powers that be, were thrilled. They said, these are our boys. This is what is going to give us strategic depth against India. That was the military doctrine for 3 decades. Well, to their great disappointment, what they have found is that the Taliban government is now giving support, sometimes open, sometimes secret, to the TTP, Tehreek Taliban Pakistan, which daily kills more, or weekly, I should say, weekly kills more Pakistani soldiers and policemen than were killed by Indians during the fight that we had 2 months ago. after Operation Sindoor. So it's now the Pakistani foreign minister going to Kabul, trying to plead with them that they should drop their support for the TTP, and the Afghans say, no, no, we don't do that. It's your problem. And the fact that they're inside Afghanistan is not because we want them, but because, they are our brother Muslims. So it's a bloody mess out there. However, Afghanistan is itself under attack. The Taliban are themselves under attack from extremists who are even more extreme, and that is Daesh, also known as the Islamic State. Now, it so turns out, and this is very puzzling, that although Pakistan welcomed the Taliban takeover, officially welcomed the Taliban takeover, yet it has not recognized the Taliban government in Kabul. Instead, it is the Russian government, Putin's government, that has been the first to recognize the regime in Kabul. At first, it was very puzzling. But then going back, look to what I talked about at the beginning, that there are these three powers that are now trying to carve up the world to their own benefit. And so what's in it for Russia? Well, think about it. Afghanistan's got a lot of minerals. They'd like to get their hands on that. But there's another thing that they're afraid of, and that is that if the Taliban fall to Daesh, Islamic State, I mean, same thing, then Daesh is already known to have its links in Uzbekistan, in Turkmenistan, and some in Kazakhstan as well. And so the Central Asian republics which border Russia could become hotbeds of extremism. So that's probably why Russia was the first country in the world to recognize the Taliban. China would probably like to do the same. And in fact, China has made overtures to the Taliban because it is also interested in the mineral deposits. It's also interested in containing religious Islamic extremism, but so far it has not made that decision. So it's now a contestation now to woo the mullahs in Afghanistan. Okay, so now let me leave Afghanistan for the moment and come to Pakistan. On the scale of global economies, Pakistan is not big, it's not small. Its GDP is 0.4 trillion. So compare that with Russia, which is 2 trillion. But it's only 1/10 that of India, which is $4 trillion. So India is maybe fourth, or maybe, no, it's fifth in the world ranking of economies. But Pakistan, in spite of being 10 times smaller in terms of GNP, nevertheless is a Praetorian state, a garrison state, and it has finally honed its military strength to match India's, which doesn't mean that in an all-out war it would win against India, but an all-out war is a nuclear war. And so one then does not think in those terms, or should not think in those terms. But nevertheless, it is not a pushover for India. In fact, seeing that most friends listening on are from India, I need to tell you what the mood is like after Operation Sindoor. When I say the mood, I don't mean the mood of the Baloch or the Gilgit-Baltistanis or the Sindhis, but the establishment, which is largely Punjabi and partly Pathan. The establishment has been ecstatic, happy. The fact that Pakistan shot down 5, maybe 6 Indian planes so boosted the military that almost the very next day, General Asim Munir promoted himself to Field Marshal Asim Munir, and the jubilation has not, well, it's decreased. Of course, there's a natural time scale. It's not as high as it used to be before, but the military is riding high. They said that, look, we have shown to the world that India cannot harm us. But of course, the fact that Pakistani airfields were targeted, that some pretty sensitive places were destroyed. But when you lose aircraft, that there's a kind of symbolic importance attached with that. And so the military now rides high. It has used that for suppressing dissent across the country. Now, they don't talk about Baloch rebels or Baloch nationalists anymore. They talk of those engaged in fitna al-Hindustan. Fitna is disturbance, is violence, which is well, it's that. And then al-Hindustan, of course, you understand. So all that happens, all that's bad in Pakistan now is called fitna al-Hindustan. It's total nonsense, but that's what happened as a consequence of Operation Sindoor, which I think was one of Narendra Modi's most disastrous decisions. Disastrous, well, maybe not so much in military terms. There was a back and forth. We still don't know the full truth on that. But in terms of the effect it had diplomatically. And so there we see General Asim Munir now hobnobbing with Donald Trump in the White House. Unimaginable. But this is what has happened. So here is where China also comes in. The missiles that took down the Rafales were, of course, Chinese. The aircraft, the JA-10, JF-17, JF-10 and JF-17s, they were Chinese. The satellite information provided was Chinese. The training provided was Chinese. But of course, the Pakistan military takes credit for that. But this is now saying one thing which is very important. And the fact that Asim Munir, Field Marshal Asim Munir, I'm sorry, he was just in China and was given a guard of honor over there, tells you that China is now viewing Pakistan as a proxy for testing its weapons, its advanced weapons, and is not just throwing its second-rate stuff over there, but the fact that these weapons were used and used efficiently and properly and before the whole world has pushed up the stocks of those Chinese aircraft and missile companies. They pushed down Dassault's stock. And as a consequence of this recalibration, I think the Indian government is also making some overtures towards China. It should not have alienated China as it did. Okay, but now done with Pakistan, almost. Let's come to India, which is very upbeat today. GDP is $4 trillion. It is now the 5th or the 6th largest spender on the military. It has far outdistanced Pakistan. In fact, it doesn't consider it to be a competitor in anything, although once upon a time, the difference between the two was not very great. That is, if you weight by the population, Pakistan and India started out not as different as they are today. That's because it has a strong educated class, which Pakistan does not have. It has educational institutions like the IITs, very strong technically. Okay, I know that the average may not be very good, but the best are indeed extremely good. And so India is very upbeat today. It has a different view of the world as compared to Pakistan. Nevertheless, Pakistan remains the central focus of India's attention. And here is where the real danger comes. We have cut off diplomatic relations with each other. And I know Manishankar Iyer is there in the audience, and he has reiterated again and again that India and Pakistan need to talk, and they need to talk regardless of the outcome. They have to discuss everything, anything, at least just meet. Well, even that is not happening. Track 2 has, to my knowledge, also been suspended. And so the chance that another Pahalgam will occur is now considerably greater, because this is just a ceasefire. It's not that anything was resolved there. And so in terms of the question that I had raised earlier, what should be done, I think the outstanding issue is that of Kashmir. But can Kashmir be solved? Well, in mathematics, some equations can be, but others cannot be. Some equations have no solution, and I believe that Kashmir has no solution. None. None that would be welcomed by India or by Pakistan or by the Kashmiris themselves. Okay? So does that mean that we'll have more fighting? We could, if we are stupid. But if we are smart, we have to then find a path in which we don't look for a solution. Instead, we wait for the time when someday a solution becomes possible, which could be 30 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. Who knows what the world will look like then? Who knows what the priorities will be at that time, and so forth. For now, to my mind, the only solution is that which was proposed by General Musharraf and Lamba. It's also called the Dixit Plan, which is soft borders, allow divided families to reunite across the line of control, let there be trade between the two countries, and basically cool down things. Because there's nothing that can be solved over here. Instead of this, something very ugly and I think intolerable happened. So just as Putin and Trump are tearing up international agreements, so also Modi took the step of saying that the Indus Waters Treaty will now be held in abeyance, which means that a treaty which was solemnly entered to now can be violated should India wish to do so. And if that happens, then all bets are off. Then Pakistan, if it is deprived of water, let's say by the building of sufficiently big dams on the Indian side, which is not going to happen now, but could happen in the next 10, 20 years. Well, what do countries do when their very existence is threatened? Then they turn irrational, violent. And in the nuclear age, you can't allow that to happen. Plus the fact that once the upper riparian state decides to exercise its control, then it can become victim to other treaties being torn up, and then the whole bottom falls through. In fact, what we're seeing now is that China is building a dam on the Brahmaputra, and if that goes through, now that there's, as far as I know, there's no international agreement on that, but if that goes through, then it's going to have a major impact upon India. So the point is that in a world that is connected together and connected through water particularly, we have to be rational in terms of the actions that can be taken. India today is very upbeat, and I wish I could have shown you one. I had only one one graph to show you. I found this in the New York Times, but I can't. I'm not sure I'll be able to do this technically. But I was shocked out of my mind when I saw that the number of private jets in India, the number of their departures, takeoffs, and landings, which is recorded by some international aviation authority, is now the largest in the world, exceeds that of the United States. And that's okay. It shows that you have a lot of very rich people in India. Yeah, the Ambanis, the Adanis, and whoever else, Tatas, etc. But the consumption is so specious. So here's a country which, on the average, is the average person in Pakistan is very, very poor. The average person in India is maybe not poor to that extent, although in my trips over there, I've seen what happens by the railway tracks. But it's a desperate situation for tens of millions of people in India and in Pakistan. And yet you have these people who crow about how much money they spend on weddings. So much has to be changed in the world, and there's so little time for it. Lastly, Bangladesh. My first ever visit there was just after the revolution, after Hasina was chucked out, and I came back very happy, frankly. I saw over there a degree of secularism, lack of the extreme Islamism that I see in Pakistan all around me. And I was so happy that I had gone there for a conference to celebrate Shautandranath Bose, Hindu. Can you celebrate a Hindu in Pakistan? No. And here was Bose being celebrated in Dhaka. I went to Dhaka University and sat in the Hindu temple in Dhaka University. We don't have a single Hindu temple in Islamabad. They don't allow it to be built here. And so I came back very hopeful. I see Muhammad Yunus as a very positive force over there. Whether he will prevail or not, whether the elections to be held early next year will be held fairly and freely, I don't know. But socially, I see Bangladesh as being way ahead of Pakistan. Economically, it is doing better, thanks to a much greater participation of women in their labor force. And I saw that same greater participation in Nepal when I visited just a few months ago. Nepal, they are a little bit afraid of India and afraid of interference in their domestic politics because of the big brother. But as a whole, they are upbeat. And so here's a whole region which has parts of which have a really good future ahead of them. Parts of them, Afghanistan in particular, where I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, will take maybe half a century more, who knows. Iran will have to figure out its destiny, whether it wants to remain with the mullahs. Pakistan will have to fight its military and install and have a democracy that matters. India, I think, is doing very well in terms of economic power. I wish it well, but I'm fearful of how it has followed Pakistan down towards the treatment of its minorities. I certainly hope that that will not happen in Bangladesh. So there's a lot ahead for all of us to work towards and to hope for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pervez Saab, for this beautiful, exhaustive, and very thought-provoking presentation, and the urge to find a path for a better future in South Asia, this part of South Asia. So there are many scholars and activists in the meeting today. So we'll be continue the discussion. We'll have the discussion, but first of all, I will invite my friend and senior comrade Ravi Sinha to share his comment. Ravi, please.
Thank you, Subhash, and thank you, Pervez, so much for accepting our invitation again. And as usual, for a wonderful, comprehensive, insightful discussion. As always, whenever we have you, we have house full. That is the situation today. We have this limit of 100 people in our Zoom subscription. Anyway, there are I'm sure there will be thriving discussion after your thought-provoking talk. So let me quickly make a comment and ask a question. Well, comment is basically a background to the question. One thing I wanted to hear your thoughts on, and maybe time prevented to get into that kind of detail, is that in this tripolar world that you mapped out, the powers, the new powers, China and Russia, one feature I feel is that whether positively or negatively, whether you like it or not, there is a national will or collective purpose and will the state there have been able to gather behind their power. In case of China, of course, it has been easier because many people call it a civilization state, and it has been easier for them, given their history, to rope in the civilizational strength and unity behind the ruling party. Russia, I think you have seen much more negatively, probably rightly so, given Putin's character. I probably see it place more equal blame on West to provoke Russia into Ukraine thing, because NATO was expanding and always pushing, violating the agreement of the 1990s in the post-Soviet Union period that NATO will not expand. They have been expanding and pushing, and Georgia in 2008, Ukraine in 2014, and then in 2022, I think West is equally responsible. But anyway, those are finer details. The strength of Russia, despite its smaller economy, comes not only for military, because also because the Russian society is quite conservative. Russian Orthodox Church is quite strong, and Putin, with his czarist kind of ambitions, have been able to rope in the civilization behind his power. Now, the reason I am bringing this out is that in case of South Asia is also known as an old civilization, but civilization and that the personality of the region that comes out of that civilization instead has become kind of burden on us. Why it is that China, which was equal or maybe even a little bit behind per capita GDP of India as late as 1989, is now 5 or 6 times larger and stronger than India. So is it only the policy? Of course, it is policy. Is it only the ruling party? Of course, that is true. But India looks like, we sitting in India, you have a more kinder approach towards India's achievements and so on. But we feel that India is going down the drain in many ways. Half of India is in very poor shape. The total GDP is one thing that India will grow. If nothing is done, still India will grow at 6% or so. Just the factors of the world market and age group that India has in its population and all those things, will push it, no matter who rules. So India is not in good shape, but South Asia as a whole has performed much worse than China, much worse than Russia, much worse than even Iran, about which, I think that Iran has inflicted as much damage on Israel recently as Israel has inflicted on Iran. But anyway, we don't like mullahs and so on, but, we cannot say that Iran is about to collapse. So the civilizational strength is behind the mullahs in Iran. Civilizational strength is not behind Indian rulers or Indian establishment. So is in Pakistan, so is in Bangladesh. Bangladesh could be compared with Vietnam. Vietnam is doing wonders, Bangladesh's achievement, which is much better than India, fades, in face of Vietnam. So my question is that the civilizational things that becomes positive for China seem to become negative for South Asia. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or even it is a matter of centuries, but even in next 50 or 100 years, can South Asia do something to itself internally so that it can stand in a tripolar or multipolar or whatever world? So I'm sorry I have taken some time, and there are people in the audience like Muni Sahab and so on. So if you could start your comments with that.
Okay, well, it's a great question. Why do countries achieve as much as they do, or why, in some cases, do they not achieve? And I think the answer has to do largely with civilizational matters, but also they have to do with the direction of politics and economics and how these policies are managed. Now, let's take any of these countries, Europe, Russia, or the United States. Now, these are all countries that were inclined towards a rational view of the universe. So soon after the scientific revolution, these ideas of the clockwork universe, they permeated there. In China, you could say they were already there, but that they were absorbed. The new ideas of the scientific revolution were quickly absorbed over there. And so the early greatness of Chinese civilization, the fact that it is China which had the first census, it is China where the first paper was made, it was China where the first cubic equation was solved, etc., that quickly caught on. And so once the Cultural Revolution was over, then China then was able to gather that huge amount of brain power, of talent, of just people, and it was able to work towards making itself what it is now. What's the difference between India and Pakistan? India has done very well for itself, relatively speaking, as if you compare India with Pakistan, not in terms of GDP alone, but in terms of its ability to create institutions like TIFR or IITs or whatever. And I know you have a right to be critical of the way India has gone. India has not addressed matters of poverty, but it has created a class of engineers, scientists, economists, and others who have latched on relatively easily what came after the scientific revolution, what came after the Enlightenment. Now, Muslims on the subcontinent have had a more difficult time with that. And if one goes back to, I don't know how far back I should go into history, but there was an aversion to modern knowledge. There was an aversion to, there was all this cultural pride that we are the people who have conquered India, and we do not need anything besides the Quran. So that kind of nonsensical thinking kept Muslims backwards for a long time. It's still keeping a lot of Muslims backwards. Of course, the good thing is that increasing numbers of Muslims are realizing that that is not the way to go, that modern education is what is indispensable. And so those cultural changes are happening, but they haven't happened fast enough. If you compare Pakistan to Iran, well, Iran has a theocracy, but it has a culture which was steeped in another idiom, and this was even before the advent of Islam. And it has managed to keep some of those to itself. And if you look at, let's say, book reading habits in Iran, they are far in excess of those in Pakistan. And so the fact that the mullahs have taken over has not meant that they have destroyed science. And so basically, in one sentence, I'll say that a country's ranking in the present world is largely determined by its acumen in how it is able to harness modern knowledge for its own benefit.
Thank you, Pervez. We have with us Manishankar Iyer Saab, but I will request him to share his views and comments. Mani Saab.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was saying that I am subjected to a lot of lectures and a lot of attending seminars, but I've rarely attended such a brilliant presentation of the situation of the world and of our subcontinent's place in that world, as we have just heard from Pervez Hoodbhoy. It really was an outstanding lecture, and I think you'll be doing a great service to all of us if you were to circulate what he said as widely as possible. I think I would add that as far as his view on Russia and Ukraine is concerned, there was a gap. That was the gap that Ravi filled by saying that the crisis was really brought on by the West ignoring its commitment to Russia in the late 1990s, that they would not expand NATO's frontiers right up to the border of Russia, and that it was because they were doing it and had demonstrated earlier through color revolutions that they were doing it, that led to Putin attacking them. And I don't think Putin anticipated that they would resist as fiercely as they have done, and he doesn't know how to get out. So it reminded me of a question that Brezhnev asked Indira Gandhi after the Russians had gone into Afghanistan. He said to her, "Madam, can you tell me how to get out?" And she said, "By the same way that you came in." So I think Putin would be well advised to simply go back. And now that he has gained a certain amount of Ukrainian territory, which can act as a buffer for him, to make do with what he's got, rather than try to expand his influence into Western Ukraine. In fact, I had the opportunity of visiting Ukraine several times about 10 years ago. That was before all this trouble started. And it was so evident that it was not an integrated country. The western part of the Ukraine was looking west, and the eastern part of Ukraine was looking east. And that is the military position that has now been created. And therefore, I would hope, although there's very little evidence for my hope, that Putin will see good sense. But to come to ourselves, I'm very impressed with what Pervez has to say about Iran having lost its will to be a confrontationist state. I think that's true, but it is a great loss for the world if it is true. My own Iranian experts in India, people like M.K. Bhadrakumar and Talmiz Ahmed, they seem to think that Iran has always, I'm talking about the 20th century, has always, asserted itself. But I think Pervez has a point that what happened to them in the 12-day war has really shocked them. I also think he's absolutely right in saying that why Iran has emerged among Muslim powers as a leading intellectual hub. After all, they couldn't have been on the edge of making a nuclear bomb if they didn't have several nuclear scientists. And you can't have several nuclear scientists if you don't have several other types of scientists as well, is because a long time ago, unlike the Sunni countries, they decided that they would embrace, at least partially, the rational world that the West was projecting. So we've got, that's the situation with regard to that. And I think his analysis of why Afghanistan is so crucial to the future, of Russia today, and very possibly China tomorrow, is what accounts for Russia having become the first state to recognize Afghanistan, and China teetering on the edge of doing so, because they have a big Muslim problem among the Uyghurs. And curiously, the only country in the world, apart from Israel, that tended to back us after Pahalgam was Afghanistan, because Jaishankar went there, and it turned out that our only real friend in the subcontinent is the regime in Kabul. So I would have liked Pervez to have also considered how India finds strategic depth against Pakistan in Afghanistan, because that does complicate Pakistan's own situation. Yes, they have created a Frankenstein, which is consuming them. They hadn't expected that to happen. Lastly,
Absolutely.
I would like to mention what he said about Bangladesh. I think the Bangladesh that came after Hasina, I think, was a Bangladesh of great hope. But they seem to be betraying that hope. They seem to be in a state of very great confusion. And what I would like to really do is go back to Bangladesh, but with Pervez. And we can check out from our numerous, at least I have a lot of contacts in Bangladesh because I've been involved with them since literally the day on which Pakistan surrendered to India and Dhaka. And therefore, I would like to meet with those people. And if I could do it in the company of an intelligent, humane Pakistani, then maybe I'll get insights that I wouldn't otherwise get. As far as India is concerned, I think the portrayal that you have made of Operation Sindoor is not only totally realistic, but completely unknown in India. You talked, Pervez did, of the ecstatic reaction in Pakistan to the outcome of Operation Sindoor. Here, there was an ecstatic reaction thinking that Pakistan's air force has been neutralized. Now, our losing 6 aircraft, if that is so, because nobody in India is willing to confess to that, but all the facts that, or the evidence that Pervez adduced, such as what's happened to the shares of Rafale, that is Dassault, and what has happened to the shares of Chengdu Aeronautics Corporation, show that something did happen, but we Indians are in total ignorance of what happened, and we don't want to know. I've repeatedly written about this, but I find that people feel it would be unpatriotic to talk about it. So we are in a miasma. We think that Operation Sindoor was a great success and that the Pakistanis have now been terrified into not conducting terror operations on us. And so we've said that Operation Sindoor is open-ended, but as Pervez said, there is a terrible danger that the Pakistani reaction to whoever was responsible for Baisaran will again do something like that. When the Americans faced 9/11, they did declare a global war on terror. But the most important thing they did was to strengthen homeland security. And what we ought to do is not asking Pakistan, which I understand last year lost 3,500 lives to terrorism, whereas we've lost only 189 lives in that same period, to ask Pakistan, of all countries, to stop terrorism. They can't. Is to protect ourselves from terrorism wherever it arises. And that dimension, which is Amit Shah's dimension, has not been mentioned once, whereas Rajnath Singh's dimension is all the time being talked up. Equally, on the economic front, our sheer size makes it inevitable that unless we fall on our faces, we cannot but become third, second, and who knows, number one country in the world as far as GDP or GNP is concerned. But people don't eat GDP, you don't wear GDP, you don't live under GDP, you live not even on per capita income. You live on your own income. And there we are approximately the 130th poorest country in the world. So what Pervez was looking at on our railway tracks is what is evident anywhere and everywhere in the country. And what is worse, at the moment, we are doubling down on our minorities. There is a move now that I think disgraces us as never before. All Bengali speakers, provided they are very poor, are being picked up from Gurgaon, next to Delhi, and bussed out of Delhi. And people are being pushed out of West Bengal into Bangladesh and saying, we know nobody here, all our people are in India. And we are allowing this atrocity to continue. And our mouths are completely shut as far as Gaza is concerned. It's just shameful that we should abstain on every resolution and then talk about what's happening in Gaza without once mentioning Israel. A few days ago, our permanent representative succeeded in disgracing Mahatma Gandhi's India as nobody else has done by drawing attention to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but refusing to even mention the word Israel. And we are, in fact, in a situation where our Prime Minister's role model is none other than this war criminal called Benjamin Netanyahu. So, in these circumstances, we are failing our civilization. That's the point that Pervez, I thought, was going to make, but he's too polite to make it. It is India that is failing its own civilizational values. And we are adopting the values of the Nazis. We are adopting the values of the Zionists. We are adopting the values of MAGA. And we are blaming it all on Pakistan. But I want to end my intervention with a question to Pervez, a question that's bothering me greatly. When I lived in Pakistan for 3 years, from 1978 to 1982, I was so overwhelmed with the affection I received from every section of society and every single element of the political spectrum of Pakistan, that I have been back to Pakistan at least 40 times. I think it's about 45 times in the last 43 years. But I think as a result of the Indian attitude to Pakistan, especially in the last 11 years, even my closest friends are beginning to have the most serious doubts about Indian intentions. So, where I used to say that the constituency for peace among the people of Pakistan is larger than the constituency for peace in India, which I'm afraid is confined to 100 persons on your screen, today has that constituency for peace and harmony with India reduced in Pakistan, as I think it has, or Allah save me, I hope it has not. But only Pervez will be able to say. Thank you.
So I have no means of actually judging that, but I don't think that that constituency has decreased. People
good.
do want peace with India, and there was euphoria after the failure of Operation Sindoor. But now, and the army for a while, it was all over the place. And in fact, if you go out on the streets, you'll find General Asim, Field Marshal Asim Munir there on billboards, but not so many of them. And there's a great dislike for the army. In fact, I'd say a hatred for the army in many quarters of Pakistan because of its predatory nature, because of the fact that they steal land from people. And I think the constituency for peace between India and Pakistan has not decreased. I'm pretty hopeful that it has not decreased in India as well, and that we are more than 100 people.
I wish you would
Bhargav, please
introduce
take
me
up
to
the
them.
question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Bhargav, one sec. Professor Shahid
Yeah.
has raised his hand. Please.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Subhash. Pervez, thank you so much. I simply admire your courage sitting where you sit and still talk freely about rationality. And that is an inviting danger. Unfortunately, that's happening in India too. While I agree with nearly all that you have said, I want to point a few things there. The faith-driven irrationality that is keeping back the Muslim civilization is far more pronounced in Pakistan than it is in India. The other factor in India is that the Muslim community is being held down actively. And that is a major change from the India that I grew up in. So when you say that it is this faith that is holding back the Muslim civilization, I agree with you completely. I agree that faith, by definition, is the dead end of inquiry. And you and I both have always been talking about the beginning of learning rather than the end. So at the same time, though, we must recognize that the Muslim community, at least in India, is being trampled.
I would completely agree with you on that. And in spite of the fact that, look, you and I would prefer secular-minded people, we would like people to look at the universe in rational terms rather than in terms of the religion that they were born into. We nevertheless, as humans, recognize the fact that we are conditioned by our society and that we should not be held responsible for accidents of birth. And so to target Muslims or to target Hindus or to target any people of any faith would be wrong. And this is possible only in a secular state, one which is blind to the religion or to the ethnicity of its citizens. And that was the argument for secularism in India and everywhere else. So I think you still have a chance of working for that in India. In Pakistan, we have to fight to even say that secularism is not atheism. So, you know, Maulana Maududi ye kehte the कि सेकुलरिज्म लादीनियत है, हम ये कहते हैं कि ये हमदीनियत है, हर दीनियत है। आप जिस मजहब के भी हों, आप रह सकते हैं, आपके हुकूक एक ही जैसे होंगे। That's the meaning of secularism. And of course, India has moved away from that, away from the state which was in 1947 under Jawaharlal Nehru.
Thank you very much, Professor Pervez, for this fantastic presentation. And I will take some of the questions from the chat box. First question is posed by Mrs. Malati Palla. While thanking you very much for this wonderful and insightful session, she posed two questions, related questions. One is, was bipolar world of the old times, between United States and Soviet Union, that bipolar world better than the current tripolar world for the South Asian countries to flourish economically and politically? That's the first question. And second question, is Pakistan at a disadvantageous position compared to India politically in the tripolar world, considering the India's relationship with China and Russia? This is the question, two questions.
Yeah, interesting questions. Well, of course, they're very different times. I am not sure that the Cold War was a very good time. We were always hovering on the edge of an abyss, and things had gotten pretty close to that at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then we had, of course, those horrors in South America of basically mass killings. So it's hard to say which are better times. I think that the disappearance of the Soviet Union upset things for a long time. Now America is going to have competition. Now it's going to be a tripolar world, and each country is going to try and take advantage of that. So will it be a better world? I think that is too difficult a question to ask me. We would have to have some metric by which we could answer this question. So, for example, are there fewer or more people dying in conflict zones? So then you would need. So I'm looking at this in a scientific way. You need somebody to compile the statistics of those who were dying then as compared to now. Then, so let's talk after the Second World War. You had the Korean War, you had the Vietnam War, then you had a lot of wars in secret wars in South America. And now, of course, you have wars as well. Also genocides, not just the one in Gaza, but the Rwanda and so forth. So I think, your question is a good question, but it's too hard for me to answer. It should be done by some social scientists and based on such a gathering of such statistics. Now, in terms of whether Pakistan is better placed or India is better placed, I think, this patch up with Trump and the fact that he is entertaining our field marshal in the White House, and the fact that the same field marshal has just gone to China, has got a guard of honor over there. I suspect this won't matter a whole deal, because ultimately the strength of countries comes from the strength of their economies and what they can provide to the world. So in that regard, I think India is going to tower over Pakistan. Pakistan has at the moment surrendered itself to becoming a proxy of China. But this is, of course, always going to come at a cost, because the US and China are in conflict. And so it's going to try and manage those conflicts. But it can only do so properly if it has its own economic strength. Now, earlier on, Pakistan used Afghanistan as a way to leverage its importance in the world. But Afghanistan is no longer important to the United States. And it basically lost and got the hell out of there. So Pakistan is still looking for some peg on which to reclaim its strategic importance. And this present administration of the United States has given it a new lease of life, but I don't think it's going to last. And Trump is not going to be around after 3 years anyway.
Subhash, can I ask the question?
Yeah.
I'm afraid I have to go. So thank you very much, Pervez. It's been a superb evening. And I think I have certainly learned a very great deal thanks to you. But I
Thank you. Thank you, Maniji. Thank you very much.
I have a family engagement. Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you, Ravi, for having called me.
Yeah. We have with us Professor Jyotsna Rege. I will request her to unmute and share her comments. Jyotsna ji.
Oh, hi, Pervez.
Hey, hello. How good to see you, Jyotsna.
I loved your big picture sketch, which was just so brilliant, and a lot of details that, that filled in that picture for me. But I was left with a couple of main questions I put in the chat. But one is, I'd like to have heard a little bit more about where India has positioned itself strategically in this tripolar world towards Trump's US, Russia, and China, and whether what it seems to be trying to do pragmatically and strategically is working for it. And particularly thinking about the implications of the Quad set up by the US and BRICS and where India stands in that. And then about Bangladesh, I'm not an expert, but my Bangladeshi friends aren't feeling as positive as you seem to be. They initially were very hopeful after the 1974 student-led move. I'm sorry, 2024 student-led movement, but it's given way to dismay over an evident rise in a kind of Saudi-style Islamism there. And so they just feel that that movement doesn't seem to have lost its way. And so I just wondered your thoughts about those two things.
Yeah, I think India did well in entering into BRICS, which is Bangladesh, Russia, Brazil, Russia, India, China, etc. But now it doesn't seem to be making much headway. And similarly, Quad seems to be in a quandary, especially after, and that's, both of these are because of the way that the United States is influencing world politics, and it's become a personal playground for Donald Trump. It's thrown actually the Indian calculations into a tizzy, because India had never expected this kind of turnaround, which may turn around again. And look, this is the way it was with tariffs. The tariffs suddenly shot up to 130% for China, and then the next week they were down to pretty much where they were earlier. And this is the way it has been with other countries as well. So right now, American foreign policy is affecting things all over the globe. But India, I would say, is in a pretty solid position by virtue of the fact that it's a big country, that it has a big economy, that it has, above all, expat Indians in the United States and in Britain and in parts of Europe as well, who are very influential and who are nationalistically inclined. So I think we're going through a storm of sorts, and that normalcy will emerge again after a few months. As far as Bangladesh goes, yes, I know it is worrying. One sees the demonstrations over there of Islamist parties. And while I was there, I saw one demonstration being held by the Khatme-Nabuwat people, who are the most virulent of the lot and who want this tiny community in Bangladesh called Ahmadis to be chucked out of Islam, just as they were in Pakistan. And that's going to bring hell upon them. But it's also a matter of great concern for the Hindus of Bangladesh, who by and large were treated pretty much as, I wouldn't say that that there wasn't prejudice over there, but it was of the scale of the prejudice that Muslims feel in India. It wasn't the scale of prejudice that minorities feel in Pakistan, where they're pretty much stripped of all rights. So Bangladesh is in flux, I agree. BNP and the Jamaat-e-Islami have split recently. That's a good sign. Their combined strength would have been harder to deal with. The Awami League, unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately because they do have their supporters, probably won't make it to the elections. So, yeah, I share your concerns, but at least there's a social base in Bangladesh, which may not be expressed politically, but it exists, and it is secular-minded. It is not extremist, as it is in Afghanistan and to a degree in Pakistan.
Thank you.
Mr. Prakash, India has raised his hand. I would request him to unmute himself. Please.
Hello, Pervez Jayaprakash here. I think you missed out Sri Lanka. And also my specific question is, how different is the Pakistan's policy on Palestine different from India's?
Sri Lanka, yeah, I did not touch upon. That's because I know so little about it. But it, of course, is influenced to a great degree by India. It seems to have a brighter future in the sense that it has certainly universal literacy over there. It has gone through a civil war and emerged with scars, but is again functioning. It has had to deal with the crisis, which was the fertilizer crisis. But as far as I know, it is now relatively at peace with itself. And I don't have very much more to say on that. As far as the policy regarding Palestine, well, India's former policy on Palestine, that is to say under the Congress and Jawaharlal Nehru, and then all the subsequent, even under Indira, I think that was appreciated and welcomed by Arab leaders of that time, who were then committed to Palestine and, in fact, would not have given up had they not lost two wars, 67 and 73. But now I think Indian attitudes towards the Middle East are based on pure opportunism and on dislike of Muslims everywhere. And so even if there is an attempt to reach out to Afghanistan, it's only because the Taliban have turned against Pakistan. Their Indian foreign policy seems to be guided by an innate dislike for Muslims, but that gets overpowered when there is sufficient advantage to be gained. So, for example, the fact that Narendra Modi got the highest award from the Saudi government was because of the fact that, India is useful to Saudi Arabia, to Kuwait, to Dubai, and so forth, and that Indians over there provide vital support for the functioning of their economies. So I think that's the official position taken by India, as Manishankar said, is reprehensible. After all, you can't be neutral about what's happening in Gaza today.
No, vis-a-vis Pakistan.
Vis-a-vis?
Pakistan.
So
Pakistan's policy on Palestine.
Pakistan's policy on Palestine has been lip service. Of course, it is ghastly what's happening over there. So what is Pakistan doing about it? And what can it do? Not very much. After all, we are something like 2,000 kilometers away from there. We are not one of the countries surrounding Israel or Gaza. We don't have a border like Egypt has a border. Egypt has flatly refused to take any into itself. And Jordan has played both sides. It doesn't want to be invaded by Israel. Lebanon has been bombed into submission, and Syria, the Golan Heights, have now been occupied by Israel. And so the ability of countries over there to resist has sharply decreased. Pakistan is just a bystander, so all it can do is pay lip service.
We are with us Professor Anand Teltumde. I will request him to unmute himself. Anand.
I'm Very happy to see excellent presentation by Professor Hoodbhoy. I do not have any specific questions, but I just congratulate NSI for having organized this and would like to have links for future programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gohar is also there. Gohar is our friend. Please.
बड़ा मुश्किल होता है कुछ कहना इतने ब्रिलियंट लेक्चर के बाद। आपके दिमाग में जो सवाल होते हैं वो सारे आप शायद भूल जाते हैं। जो सोचा था कि परवेज साहब से ये पूछेंगे वो पूछेंगे, ये बात करेंगे दिल की अपने, वो सब कुछ इतने खूबसूरत इतने ब्रिलियंट लेक्चर के बाद, और मैं मणिशंकर जी से बिल्कुल अग्री करता हूँ कि you learn a lot after such brilliant lecture and you take back home so much to munch on. परवेज भाई, मेरी परेशानी ये है कि आपने 2-3 बार एजुकेशन सेक्टर के ऊपर बात की और उसकी इम्पोर्टेंस के ऊपर बात की और इंडिया के डेवलपमेंट में खासतौर से उसके रोल के ऊपर बात की। मैं बिल्कुल सही, मुझे नहीं मालूम कि पाकिस्तान के बारे में ये कहना ठीक होगा या नहीं, कि उन्होंने शुरू में ही अपने यहाँ एक छोटा सा रूलिंग क्लास ऐसा बनाया जिसने पाकिस्तान में एजुकेशन के बारे में कभी सोचा ही नहीं, आम जनता की एजुकेशन के बारे में कभी सोचा ही नहीं, अपने बच्चों को पढ़ा लिया। यहाँ हिंदुस्तान में डेफिनेटली, जिसे हम नेहरूवियन एरा कहते हैं, वहां खुद मुल्क के बच्चों की एजुकेशन के बारे में सोचा। और पाकिस्तान जिस हालत में है या अफगानिस्तान जिस हालत में है, जिनके बारे में आपने बहुत डिटेल में बात की, उसकी शायद एक वजह यह भी है कि एजुकेशन सेक्टर में बहुत बुरा हाल रहा दोनों मुल्कों का। और हिंदुस्तान में हमें खुशकिस्मती है कि नेहरू जैसे प्राइम मिनिस्टर शुरुआत में ही मिल गए और मौलाना आजाद जैसे एजुकेशन मिनिस्टर मिल गए। अब जो हाल हुआ है हिंदुस्तान का, जहां एक एलीट क्लास डेवलप हो रही है पाकिस्तान की तरह से, जो एजुकेटेड होगी, और दूसरी तरफ हजारों की तादाद में स्कूल बंद किए जा रहे हैं, यूनिवर्सिटीज के जो करिकुलम हैं उनके ऊपर भयानक अटैक है, सेक्युलर करिकुलम के ऊपर अटैक है, रैशनैलिटी के ऊपर अटैक है, साइंटिफिक टेम्पर के ऊपर अटैक है। तो क्या ऐसा नहीं है कि हम जिस रास्ते पर जा रहे हैं उसमें, मुझे डाइवर्सिटी का पूरा एहसास है हिंदुस्तान की, उसके बावजूद हम उस रास्ते पर जाएंगे तो मंजिल भी शायद वही हो जो पाकिस्तान की मंजिल रही है। दूसरी चीज जो बहुत परेशान करती है वो, और उम्मीद कम कर देती है बहुत, वो ये है कि 70 साल में पाकिस्तान ने जो रास्ता अपनाया उसमें ये कहीं नहीं लगा कि वहां लौट के डेमोक्रेसी कभी पूरी तरह से आ जाएगी। अब हम जब हिंदुस्तान में हैं तो फिर ये उम्मीद कम हो जाती है कि उस रास्ते पर मुल्क चल पड़ा है या आरएसएस और बीजेपी ने इसे उस रास्ते पर धक्का दे दिया है, तो आगे आगे आने वाली नस्लों के साथ क्या होगा? क्या हिंदुस्तान में फिर से वापस हम सेक्युलर वैल्यूज की तरफ लौट पाएंगे या नहीं? इसका कॉन्फिडेंस जब हम देखते हैं पाकिस्तान को तो बहुत कम हो जाता है, कम से कम मेरे जैसे आदमी के लिए। आपके क्या रिएक्शन?
भाई, आपका जो सवाल है वो उस अगर हम इन चीजों के ऊपर सोचते रहें तो हमारा दिल दहल जाता। हम इंडिया की तरफ देखते थे, हमसे मतलब पाकिस्तान के लोग इंडिया की तरफ देखते थे और कहते थे कि वहां देखो तो एक खुला माहौल है, आजादी अफकार है। वहां आप ये देखते हैं कि मुसलमान और हिंदू साथ किस खुश उसलूबी के साथ रहते हैं। हमें इंडिया की तरह बनना चाहिए, वो हम एक जमाने में कहते थे पाकिस्तान में। लेकिन जब से बीजेपी का आना हुआ है तो ये उम्मीद कम हो गई है। मगर मैं ये नहीं कहूँगा कि खत्म हो गई है। मैं समझता हूँ कि इंडिया में अब भी ऐसे लोग हैं जो कहते हैं कि ये एक ऐसा मुल्क है जो हर एक के लिए होना चाहिए, खा वो मुसलमान हो, वो क्रिश्चियन हो या हिंदू हो। और ये भी कि अब जो कास्ट का फर्क है, कौन ब्राह्मण है कौन शूद्र है, उसको भी हमें दूर कर देना चाहिए। तो ऐसे लोगों की तादाद अब भी मुझे दूर से देखते हुए कुछ कम नजर नहीं आती। हाँ, पाकिस्तान के अंदर क्या आने वाला वक्त वैसे ही तारीख रहेगा? मैं समझता हूं कि इधर नौजवानों में कम से कम जिनके साथ मेरा उठना बैठना होता है, वो एक तजब्जुब में मुब्तला हैं और वो देख रहे हैं कि कितना बड़ा झूठ उनको अपने स्कूलों में, अपनी दरसी किताबों में पढ़ाया जाता है, और वो से निकलने का कोई रास्ता तलाश कर रहे हैं। तो मैं नहीं कहूंगा कि ऐसे लोगों की अक्सरियत है, लेकिन इनका वजूद भी एक उम्मीद की किरण हमें दिखाई देता है। तो देखिए, आप और मैं कुछ वक्त के बाद नहीं होंगे, आपके बच्चे बच्चों के बच्चे होंगे, और हालात किस सिमत जाते हैं आप और मैं इस वक्त कुछ नहीं कह सकते। हमें अपनी कोशिशें बदस्तूर जारी रखनी पड़ेंगी। और आपको देखकर मुझे बहुत खुशी हुई। ग्रेट सीइंग यू।
Uh, we have
always
with
a
us.
pleasure to
Oh,
listen to
sorry,
you
Niranjan
and
Pansab has raised his hand. Niranjan sir.
मैं पहले तो परवेज भुटभाई साहब का एडमायरर हूँ और उनको बहुत मुबारकबाद देता हूँ कि लेक्चर के लिए। मैं आजकल एक उत्तराखंड के गांव में रहता हूँ, जहाँ पे आसपास में जैसे आम लोग होते हैं, सीधे सरल अच्छे लोग हैं। मेरी चिंता ये है, both not only in India and Pakistan, but probably in everywhere in the subcontinent, and I have posted in the chat also, how to get over the fake religiosity in the subcontinent, which is used to cover up the destructive agenda of the interest groups which are controlling the levers of power. For instance, the army in Pakistan and the Sangh cohorts in India. How to get out of this? This is a real problem. I see the people here in the villages. They are nice, simple people, but they are also consumed by the attractions of this fake religiosity, which in an overt and covert manner being promoted by the state.
Yeah, that's the big fight that we have to fight. But look, the argument is not against religion. I mean,
The governance part.
Ji. So you can have any degree of faith that you want, as long as it doesn't impinge on the rights of people walking in the street or your neighbor or whoever. And so our fight is not against religion. Our fight is against religion becoming a part of the state, which is happening in India, but which happened in Pakistan much earlier. So let me say that in Pakistan, after 1947, we didn't have secularism, but we had a secularish dispensation. When I grew up in Karachi, my neighbors were Christian, a few Hindus, many Parsis. And this didn't change until the 1970s, basically. But it changed after Ziaul Haq came, when religion was made formally and not just de jure, but de facto a part of the state. And that's when Pakistan went on the path that it is presently traveling on. But look, even this is not permanent, as Gohar and I were discussing. This is something that we have to learn to live with, and something that we have to fight all the time and not give up. The arguments are very strong from our side. Look, when Indians or Pakistanis go to the United States or Europe, they expect to be treated as equals, and for the most part, they are. Forget about what's happening in the US for now under Trump. But by and large, the attraction of those societies is that they give equality in legal terms, certainly, and in terms of opportunity, much of the time, though not always. And so if we like those countries for these reasons, then shouldn't we have the same setup here in our own country, be that India or Pakistan or Nepal or Bangladesh or whatever?
The thing is that the people are very much amenable to be drawn into the negative agenda of the power elites of division by playing on this fake religiosity. I see it every day in such a small hamlet in Uttarakhand, which is a huge state in India. And I'm sure this must be the same in Pakistan. The mullahs must be getting their flock from amongst the people who have less education and all that stuff. And all that is playing up because the numbers of those people are rising. And they are it's a very, very scary situation. That they are willing to forego their rights.
It is scary, of course, but we can't be scared. We can't be scared of it. We have to keep arguing that you cannot have communal peace unless you treat all your citizens equally. You cannot have even social peace. So just look within the caste system, the fact that even today, there are substantial manifestations of that in India. It's not a good thing. The good thing is to have everybody equal before the law and to give equal opportunities to everybody. And this is the way that you create a happy society. This is the way in which you enthuse people into working towards the common good. It takes a long time to arrive at that. If you look at the history of Europe, Europe is not homogeneous today, but it is a lot more than it was 200 years ago or even 100 years ago. So it's a part of social evolution, and we should not be too impatient about that.
Sorry, Gohar Saab wanted to say something. I think I interrupted him. Gohar, please.
I just wanted to make a suggestion to this group that can we probably make a smaller group, and how education has been trampled upon and what trajectory it has taken in Pakistan, and a comparative study of what is happening in India today together. That could be a good contribution by some of us. So is there a possibility, Pervez bhai, that we can do it?
Yes, there's a possibility, but I have a better idea.
Yeah.
So how would it be we get 3 people or 4 people at the black hole who can talk amongst themselves, but talk also into the camera, and 3 or 4 people on the Indian side, all in the same place. So this would have to be Delhi. And some place where you could have 3 or 4 people sitting together, and then audio, which would be similar to the one I've described in Pakistan, in Islamabad. So you see, instead of a Zoom, we could have an audience there and here, and later on the audience would be able to speak to each other. How would that sound to you?
Perfect. And
Is that a possibility, first of all?
Yeah. I think it is
Is
possible.
it possible?
Subhash Bhai?
It's a good idea. We can explore it. Definitely.
Yeah, and then probably we can come up with a document also based on this discussion.
Yeah, and we could ask the participants to come up with textbooks and show this is what is written here.
Yeah.
Or read from them. And so this would be quite interesting, I'd say. And it could go live on YouTube or
Absolutely.
whatever. Yeah, YouTube or whatever media is available.
Yeah, we can discuss the modalities.
Yeah.
Come up with a solid idea.
So
we choose people who are able to talk about primary education, secondary education, college education, and university education and research. We choose people carefully, on both sides.
Subhash, if I may come in, these are very good ideas, what Gauhar is saying and Pervez is saying, and I think we should explore having some other subgroup, and not subgroup of this group, but Gauhar is linked with many civil society organizations, and Pervez, of course, he has Black Hole, and he is known all over the world, about his concern and insights about education and so on. But we will have to do that. We will have to take that as a somewhat independent initiative. Our concern here has been more, not so much, it is somewhat away from the jobs of public intellectuals, from civil society and so on. We, if I may say, we kind of arrogate to ourselves to think on behalf, strategically think on behalf of India, even though nobody will listen to us, but that's another matter. On behalf of India, on behalf of South Asia, thinks about strategies in the world, about what is happening internally in terms of larger questions. There have been great works on education and textbooks and so on done by great people, including people like Romila Thapar and so on. We could rope them in also. She is still at 94. She is still active and gives lectures, So I'm sure what the ideas that you are saying is a very nice idea, very doable idea. But we here in this group at NSI have been concerned with larger questions about South Asia, about India, about strategy. And of course, it is not that we are not interested in practical questions of education, but just that we have, we have very limited knowledge, very limited resources or no resources. So we try to focus on these strategic questions. So with that, that I just wanted to clarify. I am not disputing the greatness of your ideas.
That's good. Just a thought, a random thought. Let's see if something comes of it. Okay. Good to see you, Kanchan. Okay. You're muted.
So Professor Pervez, I have a question from the chat box. In fact, too many questions, then I just take one, especially from Anand Patwardhan. He has a technical problem that his computer right now, his camera and mic in his computer are not functional. So he posted question here. His question is how Pakistanis see Baluchis, struggler Baluchis, whether they see it just as a Indian game or they see it as something else. That's a question, basically.
Okay. Anand, I knew you had to ask me such a tough question. Sorry, I can't see you. But Anand, you're always welcome to Pakistan. I wish we could screen your films here in Islamabad. There's certainly, you have a big following over here. But to your question, how does the rest of Pakistan see the Baloch? Well, I'm telling you that it has become a very ugly situation. So now it has descended into a phase that I would say is new and extremely destructive. What has happened in recent years is that the BLA, Baloch Liberation Army, which hitherto had been fighting only the Pakistan army, now is targeting those who come to Balochistan and work over there. And those who they have targeted have been laborers, barbers in particular, those who are those who do menial jobs, and it's been very targeted. So they stop buses that are coming into Balochistan, some area of Balochistan. They look at the ID cards of those traveling, those who have their addresses as being living in the Punjab or outside Balochistan, even Sindh, they are taken off and they're killed. Now, this means that there has been a reaction in the other parts of Pakistan, particularly in Punjab, because it is particularly Punjabis and those from South Punjab who have been thus targeted. And so, in a sense, the Baloch are losing the battle for the hearts and minds of other Pakistanis. And I think this is very bad strategy. One can understand why they're being driven to this desperation. It is because, well, fighting the army is harder. They still continue to kill some troops, Pakistani soldiers, frontier constabulary, and Baloch levies, but targeting ordinary people has been a very negative development, in my opinion. I don't know how insurgencies have developed in India. Anand, you have followed this better than I. But when it becomes people against people and the poorest being targeted in this way, then it does something very negative to that movement.
We have with us our longtime friend and member of Parliament, Dharamveer Gandhi. I will request him to unmute himself and give his comment. Dharamveer ji.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. You're audible.
Thanks, NSI, very much for this wonderful exposition, like this lecture and explanation of the entire world scenario, especially within the last 6 months post-Trump period. So we were really very much. I was really very much impressed with the ideas as expressed by Dr. Hoodbhoy, and I listened to his earlier lecture also. But this lecture, the topic being the latest one, but really a difficult, not only for him, but for the entire world to understand the new phenomena and the world which is shaping up from unipolar world practically 6 months back to a tripolar world today. So about Operation Sindoor and its after effects, about status in Bengal, Nepal, Pakistan, India, and of course, rest of the Southeast Asia. It is a very good exposition, very good lecture I have listened to, and I am really obliged. I am really thankful to NSI for arranging such a learned speaker to the Indian audience.
Anand Patwal is online. You can link him.
Okay, Anand, please go ahead.
Through another computer. Yeah. So no, I think it's echo coming.
That's because this is on. It's okay, you ask.
What's on?
You speak.
So basically, the second part of my question was the fact that in Pakistan they blame Balochistan on India, but there must be some truth in that as well.
Repeat, please, Anand.
Just
Pervez, he is saying
Hello,
that
Samantini.
Balochistan is some blame is put on India about what happens in Balochistan. Anand is asking, there must be some truth in that. What do you have to say to that?
Okay, let's say that there is truth in that. Let's assume that there is some truth in that. So what form could it take, this Indian interference? So we know that, okay, there has been some efforts in that direction. Well, they could presumably provide some equipment. They could provide, the Indians could provide drones, for example, night vision goggles. They could provide weapons. So they could do that and probably do want to do that. But they can only do so effectively if there are people willing to risk their lives taking those weapons and then using them against the Pakistan army. So it is highly possible, and I think Ajit Doval has also said that we will try and harm people we will try and harm Pakistan, just like they have tried to harm India in Kashmir, tit for tat. And the fact that some operatives have been caught in Balochistan is probably true. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the people of Balochistan are resentful of being governed from Punjab. So I was in Gwadar, which is really the linchpin of the CPEC. And while going there from Quetta and then from Turbat, so Balochistan is huge. And as you travel through it, you see that at the top of ridges, on the top of hills, you have these machine gun nests with their guns pointing down towards the road. You are stopped every few miles, few kilometers by the levies, by the frontier constabulary, by the Pakistan army. And it looks like Balochistan is under occupation. So there is anger, there's resentment, and of course, India would like to take advantage of that. My feeling, my understanding is that it is giving support, but that support is not going to make the crucial difference. What is going to make a difference is that the army is going to do something extreme. And I'll tell you why it's going to do something extreme. Because there's a huge amount of mineral wealth in Balochistan, and now the Pakistan army has used that as a bargaining chip with the Americans. So there's one place in particular, it's called Reko Diq. And Reko Diq is fabulous in terms of the amount of gold and copper that it contains. And the Americans are salivating for that. Now, the Baloch would certainly not want to give away their national wealth to the generals in Islamabad or in Rawalpindi. And so that thing is going to heat up over time. Where this will go, who knows? But if the generals in Pakistan had any sense, they would have tried to create a Baloch constituency which can only be done when you give something back to the Baloch people. But they seem so intent on their ways that I don't think they're on the point of learning.
Argo, please.
Yeah. Professor Pervez, there is a question from probably the youngest of all the participants. He is a graduate student, undergraduate student. He is speaking his mind. In today's times where the young minds are mostly stuck on social media, is it really possible to bring a sense of secularism on a bigger scale? Everywhere I look on social media, even mainstream media, all I find is hate against each other, installation of fear, and more importantly, discrimination through every possible way there is. If this continues to grow, I don't see a way to bring the newer generation to a sense of harmony and humanity. So, sir, how can we tackle this?
Oh, I wish I had a prescription, but look, on our side, we have influencers, we have young people who have taken to social media, and I'm not into social media at all. I don't watch TikTok or use Instagram or even Facebook. I don't even have a smartphone, let me confess that. But there is a constituency in Pakistan for the liberal, secular young people to speak out, and they do have followings that are growing, and which I'm hopeful will continue to grow even faster. So yes, there are the religious people, the very close-minded ones and all that, and it's true on both sides of the border. But I also think that the fact that we have social media today is allowing new people, young people, to look at secularism in a different way. And there are things that challenge their beliefs. So it's, I know, a double-edged sword. I know that there are things like echo chambers, but there are also so many young people who are now crossing the lines, and they wouldn't have done that had there been no internet.
Bhargav, any more questions in the chat box?
I don't see any, Subhash, in chat box.
Yeah, Subhash. So, I mean, I think, it's getting late and we are moving towards the end. But, before we let Pervez go, I would jump in for the second time. One puzzle that I have in my mind, at least I will express it, and to the extent he can comment on that, which is the following: that in the today geopolitics, the foreign policy, there are two models, many models, but two models. One, that West, for example, Western hegemony has made use of quote unquote, let us say, value-based foreign policy. Of course, they use it to their own end, but they say that they want to spread to the rest of the world, whether they themselves follow it or not, human rights, equal right for all citizens in all countries, democracy, and so on. Let us say democracy and liberalism. And all these parties, which we have called all our life centrist parties of the ruling set, they have promoted in their foreign policy these values, quote unquote, political values of liberalism and democracy and so on. Now with Trump and people like Putin on the other side, China in a different way, for a different reason. I don't put China in the same category as Russia, but they have said that foreign policy, we will deal with our values in our societies. We do not take foreign policy as a means to promote global values like liberalism or democracy or market or whatever. So they rely more on idea of nation state. In case of China, idea of civilization state. China, at times we feel very disappointed that with all its power and clout, it sits, it can quietly look at what is happening in Gaza and many other parts of the world. And yet, whenever it speaks, it says the right thing. It never comes like Indian rulers today. They will never go to support of Israel. So when it comes to matters that matter, they take a better position. And America or West, which promotes quote unquote good values of democracy and liberalism, stands behind Israel, or maybe Israel forces America to do whatever, because of the Zionist lobby, whatever Israel is doing in Gaza. So I am often these days puzzled about my own views. I thought that Europeans created a very good society for themselves. It was welfare state, it was democracy, it was equal citizenship and this and that. And they, as well as entire Western hegemony, in the name of promoting democracy, seems to promote the goals of deep state, whereas quote unquote nationalists and whom we saw of less value than liberal Democrat globalists, they are taking good positions. I feel often confused about how to think about liberalism and democracy vis-a-vis this civilizational nationalism, of which China is a good example. Maybe many of our friends, my friends are here, who would not like to hear anything that goes in favor of Putin. But still, I will say, let us say Putin is maybe a bad example of nationalism. China may be a good example of civilizational nationalism. And they are following foreign policy, keeping their national interests supreme, of which Trump now claims to be a bad example of that. Not claims to be, he is a bad example of that. But so my question is that what do you see about these values of secularism, liberalism, democracy to be promoted by powerful states as their foreign policy, vis-a-vis saying that foreign policy should be left to a committee of nations without bringing in the values into the global arena? I hope
Okay, great question. Well, first of all, the United States has completely stepped back, and it does not support international agreements we talked about earlier. It also has given up on ideas of equality, of gender equality in particular. It now will no longer, it's not interested in combating global hunger, and it's not interested in promoting democracy worldwide. In fact, all those organizations that were formerly US organizations have shut down, given up, and so the US has stepped back into one single position, which is make America great again. So is this a good thing or a bad thing? Bad thing, in my opinion. This is one globe. We are all humans who are entitled to the same rights and have the same responsibilities. We cannot close our eyes to the fact that these are being openly denied in many parts of the world. So, for example, the fact that Afghanistan is a sovereign state does not give it the right to deny education to its girl children. That is a universal norm that is being violated. So adherence to universal norms is vital for the continued existence of the human race. Among those norms has to be protection of the planet, which the US has given up on, but which Europe has not, and which China also remains committed to. So yes, it is a very delicate question as to what should lie within the jurisdiction of a country and what should lie outside it. We cannot, for example, permit slavery to continue in some country which says that religiously we are allowed to keep slaves. No, that goes against the very grain of humanity, and it must be challenged. So, of course, the ideal way to thrash out these disputes is to take them to the United Nations. We need a global governing body which has teeth, which has power over other nations. And this is hopefully what the world will look like 100 years from now. But from here to the next 100 years is going to be difficult travel.
So we are moving towards conclusion of the meeting. Thanks, Pervez Saab, for this exhaustive, substantive, and enriching presentation on a very delicate topic. And the way in which you talked about finding a new path, despite all the problems which we are facing in South Asia. That urge to find a path is very important for us. We need to think out of box for this thing. So I thank all the participants also for joining this debate. Thanks once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you again.
Bye.